If you are able to see this conversation, you are now a part of it. So thank you for participating in some way. If you would like to grab the mic and tell us your thoughts on where we need to go in terms of mapping the relationships of the metaverse, we are currently looking at how do we design a map so that we can immediately see companies differently from, let's say, DAOs or other types of organizations. How we make those distinctions is really important to creating an equal and level playing field. So I'd love to hear from all of you who can hear me now, and that can happen in any way that you may see fit. If you can hear my voice and you want to participate in this conversation, our hashtag is mapping the metaverse. And we are at omigroup.org, and OMI Group is an ongoing open metaverse interoperability community. It is an open and independent community. We're part of the W3C, but we are not. We are not a standards making body. We are a research and development working group community. We work on those interoperable elements, and that includes asset portability, that includes identity management and identity and data sharing, what happens and how those relationships work. We do obviously touch the fields of ethics and human rights and all of the other things that are related to how we interact and engage in these spaces together. But honestly, we want to help point people to all of you who are the experts in these spaces. We've been building on the fantastic work, not just of OMI, but obviously many other communities here. Mel, I see, is here. Mel invited us to do AvaCon this weekend, the Avatar Community Convention in Open Simulator, which was a fantastic, different conversation about open source engagement in the metaverse and where the research has been happening for the better part of 15 years. So we want to make sure that one side of our industry can see the other. The same way we want to make sure that people new to our industry can access the rich research that's happened over the last 3 decades. So how we deal with the organizations, the partnerships, and the relationships, and how those sort of ad hoc relationships are sort of rapidly finding new footing. We are going to need to create an open mapping solution that allows for every organization on that map to update their own entries. That is one essential thing. We have seen how people partner to become a map editor might look something like Wikipedia, and it could look something completely different, more like Reddit. And we need to figure out what that sort of open source contribution structure is going to be for the mapping, and also how we designate, because we do want to curate this map, but at the same time, it needs to be an open resource for everyone, recognizing that everyone has some part of our puzzle to bring to the table. So I am going to go ahead, and if you would like to jump in and say something, feel free. I will do my best to bump you up into being able to speak. As I mentioned, I'm going to keep this conversation very short today, but we do have ongoing conversations happening generally on Thursday evenings around the data structuring around this initiative. That includes how do we build this open source endeavor effectively with all of our communities, not just with those who happen to be in the room today. So that is an ongoing inquiry, and making sure that we are equitable in the way we represent these relationships together. So I am going to just jump off the mic a little bit, but I want to say this is an ongoing recorded set of conversations. We have not figured out how we're going to archive this beyond GitHub. So if you are interested in participating in some aspect of the mapping, and today is not the right day for you, but you want to be a part of this conversation another time, we can find that way. The best way to do that is to join our Discord and to jump in. There's a specific thread on this initiative. So I'm going to walk us through just a little bit of where we've been, because I have the stream going and I want to be able to sort of encapsulate all of this work in a very quick order. So just to reset, this project grew out of Open Metaverse Interoperability, which is an independent and open source community. We are not the ones with all the answers. We are the ones with the questions typically. And we are here to support that research and development initiative, recognizing that it is obviously much bigger than all of us. So today we have been working toward open ways of working and creating an open spec for mapping. And that's what this HackMD document is. It is really the start of an open repo so that we can build this conversation. A lot of this is going to end up in the GitHub for comment. And so as you have comments or you have spec that you think needs to be essential to this map, we want to hear that and make sure that we are mapping for those needs. That includes a number of initiatives that are already well built that approach how we are connected. Some of those are more social structures. Some of those are association layers. Some of those are open spec that we are already adapting in terms of moving toward open standards. And you can see some of that here and some of those relationships as we begin to map out how that fits with, for example, other fields, whether that's media networks or gaming or how art assets are shared. Obviously, the Web3 DAO and NFT communities reflect a wide growth space that some of that touches the metaverse, and some of those folks are not necessarily seeing themselves as part of this larger movement. And so we can figure out how do we reflect those relationships? How do we reflect those ecosystems? Because the choice of ecosystem obviously is a huge factor in interoperability. In terms of not just currencies, but also in how information is shared within the ecosystem. When we talk about how we structure this data and how we're going to visualize it, there is interest in creating a 3D map that can work in WebXR. And we are starting to have conversations with data visualization experts. I don't think any of them are here today, but I do want to encourage them to come into this conversation as you are available. We're going to be here every Tuesday at noon during December, and also Thursday evenings we will continue open conversation. And these conversations are really designed to help build an open layer of engagement beyond what has been happening in Discord, in Git, and in smaller working groups. So recognizing that we don't want to only do our thinking in bubbles, we need to figure out how we're constantly opening those doors to new types of participation. And speaking of participation, if you want to participate in this conversation in any way, you can do that in our Discord. You can do that right now on social media on the hashtag #MappingTheMetaverse. You are obviously welcome in these Twitter spaces anytime, but I'm also going to be streaming a number of conversations, and that could include many of you in different ways. Interviews, demo nights are coming up again in January. We very much want to see the types of things you are working on related to interoperability. And that can include avatar interoperability as well. So I think, Mal, I don't know if you're able to turn on your mic, but Mal and I were a part of a panel this week, and it was specifically on interoperability, but it was at an avatar community convention where avatars were certainly a big part of that conversation. Avatar interoperability is one of, oh gosh, I think we originally mapped 4 or 5 major tentpole issues within OMI. And as we've begun to break down the map and what we need to map for, it is closer to 25 to 30 different questions related to interoperability. And these tell us what are the capacities of each world and how is information shared in and out. So what can you import? What can you export? How would this potentially be useful for the use cases you might be approaching? And so we've been talking about the relationship between open source and open code, right? Open standards with companies that are doing much more sort of product driven and relatively closed system work, recognizing that we all have a role to play in figuring these things out together. So I think most of you are not mic enabled today, which is fine, but I'm going to lose voice in probably about 10 minutes. So I just want to put that forward. As we look at this mapping initiative, I am mostly concerned that we do this in a way that includes everyone. And I need your help to do that effectively. We are currently engaging with a couple dozen active participants in this particular initiative. This, I believe, is our 4th Twitter space, and we've had over 100 people in these conversations over the last few weeks, participating in different ways and helping us to see, for example, how avatar interop might look different in Japan versus here in the US, what standards are being adopted that we might want to pull in and maybe think about centering around as well. Figuring out which pieces of the interop puzzle are going to be most essential, and then how do we represent that on the map? So when it comes to avatar interoperability, there are obviously a small number of code bases that are used. There are a few flavors of identity in terms of how identities are shared, or whether you can be anonymous, whether it is appropriate for kids. So for example, how Roblox handles identity differently from a world that might be more appropriate for adult engagement. If you're looking at our stream right now, I'm going to walk through not just the sort of existing maps that we're pulling from, but the inquiry and all of the different factors of interoperability that we're looking at mapping. So if you're on the HackMD, this is under the December 7th notes and from last week. Factors of interoperability to map include the types of organizations. And that's why I want to make sure that DAOs and alternative collectives or co-ops are also on the map, along with educational institutions, nonprofit associations. That includes our industry associations, but also equity-focused associations. So including everyone and making sure that we give equal footing to the open source communities and to the nonprofit and educational groups as well. So I want to invite all of you to feel free to jump in at any time if you see factors of interoperability that you think we need to be pulling in, or ways of representing this data. This is a data map at the end of the day, and we need to figure out how do we see DAOs differently on the map than products or companies, and how do we create that equal footing so that a DAO is still visible to the rest of the industry, because we don't want to marginalize or lift up certain types of businesses over others if it's not serving us long term. If we're thinking about the public commons includes all of us. And most of the narrative about what the metaverse is has been shaped by a small number of mostly companies up to this point. And that isn't our future. That is our past. So we get to decide now what are the relationships we want to put forward. And I want to encourage all of you to feel free to jump in anytime to be a part of that. So factors of interoperability to map include the types of organizations. And let me see, I'm going to bring you in. Kim Dow, welcome. And it's great to see you here. I've been following your work with great interest, and I'm excited to have you here. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for allowing me to speak. This is Adrian from Kindau. We're a large group of people, so I'm not sure if you've interacted with another one of us, but
I know Asya well, and we were at the Bucky Fuller Institute Design Science Studio together, so I've been following from there.
Oh, beautiful. You've been on our journey for a while then. That's awesome. I don't have much to contribute specifically to this conversation, but I just looked at the document of all your notes, and it's beautiful. And when I have another moment to really dive in and organize all of these things, I definitely am going to. And I just wanted to share my appreciation for the work that you're doing. I think it's really, really important to be creating these connections in these webs. This is something that we've been thinking about. Actually, Talik is here, and he was part of our project back when we were just a cooperative and not in the Web3 space. And these were types of things that we were talking about, is how to connect the different communities that are aligned and doing the same things. So these are really, really potent questions, especially as we're moving forward into a future and a paradigm that isn't quite structured yet. So to create these structures, to be able to have communications and pathways for further building is so important. So I'd love to hop in and help and observe and see where I can fit in to contribute to this. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. And I would love to hear your thoughts on how we can foster an open community of engagement around this conversation so that we're not doing our work in our little pocket solo. I think that's why I came to Twitter Spaces and not just to our Discord, because we do get into bubbles of thinking, and it isn't inclusive enough to map how these relationships are really going to flow between us. I reached out to someone else in your organization because I registered a website a couple weeks ago, Taoism, and specifically looking at the philosophy of Taoism and how it relates to the modern Web3 movement, and how communities like yours, in particular with Kindao, are resetting conversations about value and equity and collective power. And that to me is fascinating. And it represents a whole edge of the metaverse that I think many folks in the VR AR space don't know quite how to connect and bring fully into their world. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how we can be better at including everyone in the conversation, and also moving forward, how do we collaborate better together on this?
Absolutely. I think my initial, or at least this is what I think. I think that the first step in including everyone is to scale down the level of information so that everyone can understand. Coming from a large non-tech team, we have some people who have been in the Web3 space for years, but a lot of us have actually been more in community building, in the art realms, and these types of things. We are just learning about the Web3 space this last year. Our approach is very much from the bottom up. And what I mean by that is going into our own families and our own communities and explaining these concepts, because for us, we're not coming into it understanding every aspect of tech. And as I go through this, these notes that you have, I think it's beautiful. All of this detail is extremely needed, but also if we want to be including everybody in this conversation, especially people who may not have a full grasp on what all this stuff means, then we have to simplify it in a way. And I think that the beauty of this moment of being able to onboard people into this space is that we get to frame what this space actually means and allow people to understand the deep concept of what's going on in our world at the moment, where we're actually building a completely new paradigm. And we can give them that foundation of, hey, here are the basics of what this is, just on a technical level, but let's go deeper onto the energetic level and the foundation of what is actually happening, which is we're building something completely new that we're going to be living in for generations to come. And I think giving people that foundation allows them to come in with their intentions instead of just feeling overwhelmed, whoa, this is a lot of information and I don't get it all. It's it's okay. You don't have to understand every little thing. You don't have to know every vocabulary word. You just have to know the concepts and then go with which one feels the most aligned with you, so that you can be moving with your best intention as you're building this, because we don't want to be scattered in how we're building. So I think that those are just the thoughts that come to my head initially when I'm looking at this, is just how can we keep all layers of it? How can we keep this detail? Because there's so much I need to, like, I'm going through this, I'm like, wow, I need to learn so much about this. But then how can we also simplify it so that everybody can sculpt what is happening here?
You make some amazing points, and thank you for your openness. Sorry, I'm muted here. Thank you for your openness and your empathy. I feel like you are inviting in a whole new level of engagement that we have not yet figured out how to bring in. Um, and so far, this conversation has been very interoperability and engineering focused because we were trying to figure out the organization of the data, right? But it is about people, and it's about connecting people, and it's about connecting people through ways and flows that make sense for them instead of being corralled into a way of working that might not fit for who they are or the type of organization they want to be. And I think DAOs in particular are a fantastic example of research and development where we are testing these ideas and we're learning together whether this works or maybe this isn't necessarily the way we want to do it and we want to go to a different way of working. We are going to need those resources to share together, and you're right, we do need them to be simple enough that anyone who is in the space can contribute. That might look different for different people. So we might have an early contribution process that is very technical, and then a later participation process that is far more accessible, or something that might be a quick form that anyone could update to say, hey, this world wasn't okay for kids before, but it is great for kids now. And they weren't really taking currencies and NFTs before, but now we're doing this super cool thing with being able to share our assets through, using the GLTF spec or using NFTs or something along those lines. Figuring out what are the connection points that we need to be mapping for is one big piece of this puzzle. And when you look at this document, do you see big gaps? I see big gaps still. I see things that we are not fully resourced around yet, but also not fully, we haven't really thought through some of the layers of interoperability yet. There are big gaps in our industry. And maybe that's what the map is going to show, that we can't do this yet without these pieces becoming real and becoming realized. And that's where leadership can grow. I would love all of you, as you have thoughts and insights on ways we can do this work in the open. At OMI, we're an open community. We work in GitHub, we work in Discord, and we're using Twitter Spaces in part to begin opening the door to conversation with people who aren't necessarily in our group, but are obviously bringing amazing ideas to the table, or have ways of working, have ways of organizing. Gatherverse, for example, came to us last week. They're doing a fantastic event in February, and so we may move forward on doing something with them in person or remotely, right? Figuring out what does that unpack together when we can do some of this actual data mapping in a physical space together down the road. I'm going to go ahead and approve Francis to join our conversation here. You are now a speaker. And Francis, thank you so much for your insights over the last few weeks. I've been going back through our notes, and your name pops out as one of the most empathic contributors we've had the pleasure to be here. So thank you for being back.
Thank you so much. Great to see you again. I just hopped onto the Mapping Metaverse document. It's like so incredible, and what I really like about the platform is that you're actually breaking down a lot of different, a lot of very public service sort of like very like use cases like in the healthcare industry and caretakers and all that. So I think I guess the question about Mapping is, this is a Metaverse platform design toolkit, and I'm wondering if there's a section for staffing for like the more of the game design, game pipeline, because I think what happens is for a lot of teams are building in the metaverse, and I'm talking about not necessarily the FANG companies, but like the smaller emerging mid-tier companies, issue of staffing and how do you not share talent. I'm not sure I'm looking at the right section of the map. I could be completely wrong, but I'm wondering if there's a section for like production pipeline related stuff, because sometimes it's hard to source like skill set talent because it's all right now it's still word of mouth. I'm just curious about that. Thank you.
You're bringing up great points, and it's been on my mind as well. I think we need to simplify the production workflow, especially for young creators using WebXR. I think that's going to be a very quick and a first win initiative that needs to happen in their first quarter. It needs to happen. I see Martin here, and it needs to happen before South by, because we need creators who understand WebXR well enough to publish and get new works out there. And especially for all of our NFT creators who are currently working in 2D, really making those worlds busted out and available for people.
Yes.
I feel like there's a gap in how do you publish to WebXR effectively that needs to be addressed. There is a WebXR hackathon coming up, and I'm hopeful that there will be some sort of easier workflows developed. I'm curious, like I always ask creators, what is your ideal workflow, and what ways of working are you currently bringing people along for the ride with you on? So I guess I would take the question back to you. Do you have a workflow that you've streamlined that you would potentially share with others?
Actually, yes, I am. I've actually pivoted a lot to Blender geometry nodes and Houdini for 3D asset production, because what I'm bumping into lately is that there's a lot of 3D asset production that I have to do, but I don't have time to model every single mesh detail. And the good thing is that I've had significant practice with like Snap Material Editor with like visual effects and node graphs. So I'm very comfortable with that now. And I spent actually just a week like learning Houdini, and I was like, wow, this now makes sense. And what I would like to share with a lot of people is like, and I'm still working on this, so this is still work in progress, is how to integrate more 3D asset production, procedural creation for real-time game engines, because everyone has different opinions about NFT space, but what I'm noticing right now is a lot of people really want to do like 3D procedural worlds and characters, and their pipelines, and there's a lot of bottlenecks, and I feel like a lot of people I think a lot of creators really want to focus more on audience building and the relationships, because the asset production is very tricky. So what I'm trying to look at is how to integrate 3D asset production, procedural creation with different small or mid-sized teams that don't have the staffing of like, big game development companies to specialize. Yeah. And that's something that I'm gonna probably share more on Twitter or TikTok or Instagram or in this chat as well. I have a good idea of how it works now that I banged my head on the wall.
I know that there are others at OMI who've also been, banging the similar wall, I will call it. If you know Kaz and Christy, who were at AWE with us, but they've been focused on asset portability as well. So figuring out, once you have a great 3D art model or asset, how do you get it working smoothly across more than one world, and sort of streamlining that part of the workflow. When you're speaking about procedural, I think it is a whole new sort of growing space that we don't have well mapped yet. It absolutely touches metaverse creative work. I don't feel like I have a great handle on the space, and I used to give talks on it. So I don't know. I'm going to go back to my friends at Kodame, because the last talk I gave on procedural and generative work was with Kodame, and they're really fantastic at that. In terms of how do you conceptualize a workflow that might include a generative work or a procedural piece. I think I'm interested in it as a potential way to build WebXR worlds that feel more dynamic and less constrained by the sort of lower polygon count necessary to res these worlds. Anyway, I think these are super valuable conversations. Francis, I want to encourage you to jump into the group at OMI that is more focused around workflows and asset mapping. And I do think we need to focus on this for an upcoming hackathon, especially for WebXR, because if you can imagine porting out all of our experiences to WebXR from whatever world you're in and using WebXR as that connecting tissue for world builders to be able to, retain the creative ownership and sort of full resolution of their own world and creation while still making it available across as many spaces as possible. There's so many potential ways that could play out.
Yeah, I'm going to hop onto the my Discord chat more and really explore this subject more, because it's I think there's a lot of best practices can be shared. So thank you, Eva. I really appreciate it.
Agreed.
Hackathon.
Agreed. Yeah. And just so you know, there is a sort of growing interest in doing a hackathon related to art and asset portability. And that might be with like the Burning Man artists and world builders that are more independent in nature, not just the, sort of alt spaces of the world, but the emerging worlds as well, and the art worlds. So thinking about how we make it super easy on creators so that they're not doing as much of this heavy lifting and legwork. I think you're right on point, and we do need to make this super simple for the millions of creators coming behind. I apologize. I'm going to have to cut this conversation in 5 minutes, but if you have one more thing you'd like to add, we have 5 minutes left, and then I have to unfortunately go get a shot. I think when I look at the conversation notes and where we've had big gaps, there's obviously interop unknowns around browser interoperability and WebXR and who is accepting WebXR. We're going to try and keep that super simple for now, but recognizing that WebXR has become a more of an adopted standard, not certainly everywhere, but in many worlds. Meta traversal is a whole set of conversations that we've been having with heads of game design companies, with game platforms, with a number of different sort of major players, the Mangs and Fangs of the world, but also with independent associations to figure out how we build the accords and agreements to move between worlds effectively. And so that is very much around agreements on data privacy and safety and security, as well as just getting teams to come together and say, yes, we're going to work together on this particular piece of R&D, and let's open a portal between our worlds. In the last conversation we had last week, I think we saw 6 or 7 major independent metaverse platforms coming together to figure out their own interoperability within their independent spheres. So that could be tremendous as a response to closed ecosystems where there may not feel as easy. It may not feel as easy to engage for one reason or another. We'll just leave it at that. Obviously, there's a lot to focus on with interop. Portability of your social graph is one of the things that we will hit on in future sessions. If you have specific ways you think we should be representing DAOs and nonprofit organizations on a level playing field that feels honest and true to the contributions that people make in our industry, I'd love to hear those, and that can be on GitHub or on Discord, or just DM me anytime. The Mapping the Metaverse hashtag is something that we do watch, and you're welcome to also contribute there. And I think mostly I'm going to go ahead and close the stream. And I think these contributions have been fantastic. Overall, if you can help me on helping listen better so that we can be as effective at including everyone in this conversation, it really means a lot to everyone who can't get here today, that we keep the door open for everybody else. So I really appreciate y'all showing up. If you have thoughts, I see UX for the win. I would love to hear some thoughts on best practices for what you would see mapping the metaverse to look like and to feel like, and how people might experience that. I've had a few conversations about what this experience might need to look like and feel like, but I would appreciate other thoughts in the way. So feel free to jump into the Discord or Twitter anytime. Thank you so much. It's really great to have you all here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this room for today. Anyone else, feel free. Y'all are welcome to help host conversations and collabs. If you have a collab that you think would be really great for us to work on together, figuring out general participation in this mapping initiative is going to happen after January. So for the next 4 to 5 weeks, we're going to incubate it basically and start building out the data structures. And then figuring out how we open that door to mass participation will be the next step. So I really appreciate all of your thoughts and open ways of working here. Thank you for bringing the right people to the conversation today.
Thank you.
I'm gonna jump out and thank you all for joining us. I'm recording